Hey guys, welcome back. Today we're going to talk about a really important topic in programming called arrays. For the homework last week, you were supposed to write a program with the 3 different loops that takes 3 numbers of input. The first 2 are integers of any sort, and the third number is a specified range. The program should output all the shared multiples of the 2 inputted numbers up to the specified range. So today I'm actually going to walk through this program, so if you haven't done this, just skip this part. Alright, so inside of our main method, we're going to declare a scanner and give it a name. Then we're also going to declare 5 integers, number 1, number 2, the range, and a counter and a multiple for our while and do-while loops. Then we're going to output a message to the user saying enter the 3 positive integers. Your message might look a little bit different. Then we're going to input those 3 numbers, and we're going to give another message. This one's optional, saying multiples of number 1 and number 2 up to the range are the following. Alright, so for our for loop, we're going to start counting from number 1 because we're looking for multiples, and then we're going to go up to the range. We're going to count the range as well, so the equal sign is there. And we're going to do I++ because we're counting by 1. And we're going to have an if statement that checks if I is divisible by number 1 and divisible by number 2, and if it is, that means that they're sharing a multiple and we can output that. For the while loop, it's a little bit more efficient because in the for loop it was iterating over every single number between number 1 and the range, but the while loop is going to be more efficient because it doesn't do that. So we're going to have the multiple equal to number 1, and we're also going to have a counter. So the multiple is less than or equal to range for the same reason that it was in the for loop. And if the multiple is divisible by number 2, then we're going to output it. But why are we not checking if it's divisible by number 1? The reason is that the multiple, we're going to set it to be number 1 times the counter. So the multiple by definition is going to be a multiple of number 1 because the counter is increasing by 1, and every single time it's multiplied by number 1, then that's going to be a multiple. Alright, the do-while loop follows the same logic, except we have do over here and while over here. Alright, so what are arrays? Arrays are data structures that allow you to hold multiple pieces of data in a single object. So previously, all the variables that we had could store one thing. An int stores just one number, and a string stores just one phrase. But what if you wanted to have a list of numbers or a list of phrases? Well, arrays allow you to do that. So arrays hold a predetermined number of elements, and they can only store one data type. An important word that you need to know is index. It's kind of like how we number things in real life. For example, the 8th month, August, is associated with the number 8. So it's almost as if it's at index 8. That's because we're counting starting with the first month and then just 1, 2, 3, 4. Except Java doesn't do that. In fact, computers generally don't. They count from 0, so August would actually be at index 7. Alright, then we have an element. An element is each part of the array, so if we go with the same analogy, each month is an element. Allocation is telling Java to make memory location for the array. This is also when you would tell Java how big you want your array to be. So if you're storing months, you would set it to be 12. Arrays have something called mid-program allocation, which means that you don't have to make your array in the same line. So if you would want to make your array in the same line, you would have the type and then the square brackets, the name of your array, equal to new, and then the type, and then how big you want your array to be. But you can actually do that in 2 separate lines as well. Alright, as you can see in the second line over here, you can also hard code the list that you want to make. This time you have to use curly brackets and put everything you want in your array inside. You can also set the elements separately, and I'll show that later on. You just have to remember that Java will allocate enough space for whatever you have already put in your array, and you will not be able to add, let's say, 5 elements to an array that was set to have space for 4. What happens if you don't put anything in your array? Well, initial values are automatically assigned to arrays, elements of numeric arrays are all set to 0, and Boolean arrays are all set to false. Arrays of objects, like strings, are set to null. If you want to find the length of an array, you can write the name of your array, .length. And it returns a value, which is the size that you set over here, or over here it's going to be 4. Alright, if you want to add data points to your array separately and display it, you can use for loops. Remember what we said that, remember when we said in our last lesson that arrays are going to be counted from 0, so we have to have most of our for loops starting from 0 as well. So because, as I mentioned before, arrays are going to start counting from 0 because they're 0 indexed, our for loops are going to look like this. They will have I is equal to 0 and then I is less than the length of your array. And we're not going to count the length of the array because the last element is going to be at the length minus 1. So if you want to change the value or set a value to an index, you're going to write the name of your array, square brackets, and inside the square brackets you will put that index that you're changing equal to whatever new value. And then if you want to output that, you can print it, and you can again use a for loop if you want to print every single element. And if you want to output one index, it'll be the name of your array and then square brackets and the index that you want inside, and that returns whatever value that you've stored inside. Alright, so if you want to search if something is inside of your array or you want to see how many times it appears in your array, you can again use a for loop. We're going to have a counter over here and we're going to be looking for apple. So inside of our for loop, we'll have the same type of for loop that we had before with starting at 0 and stopping before the length. And we're going to check if each of those elements is equal to that, and then we're going to increase our counter. What happens if we don't stop for the length of the array and we go beyond that? Well, we will get an error. This is because Java never gave space for a size that is more than the size that you set before it, and because it doesn't have that space, that element and that index doesn't exist. So it's going to give you an error. So try never to go to the negative indexes in an array because that's not allowed, and you're not allowed to go beyond the size that you have set for it. So n minus 1 is the last element, and you can't go to n, you can't go to n plus 1. The error that you will get is big, scary, and red, and you do not want that. Alright, there's a lot of things that we can do with arrays, and one of those is finding the maximum, minimum, and total average value stored in an integer array. So if you want to find the maximum or minimum value, you're going to set variables to the maximum possible number an integer can store, or the smallest possible number an integer can store, and then you're going to compare it to every single element in that array to see if it's bigger or smaller. So if it's bigger, then that's going to be your new maximum, and if it's smaller, that's going to be your new minimum. If you want to find the total, you're just going to use a variable and then add every single value that you have stored inside of your array to that total. And if you want to find average, you're just going to take your total and divide it by the length of your array. Alright, so now we're going to actually demo how we would do that minimum, maximum, and total. So let's write our main method, public static void main, and then string args. Okay, and now we are going to have our array. We write the type and then square brackets, and then after that we write the name of our array, which is num array, and then we equate it to new int and the size that we want. This is going to be 10 this time. And then we have the total. So int total is equal to 0. And we're going to have our maximum value. So the maximum value is going to be set to the smallest number that an integer can store. So int max value is equal to integer dot min value. And then we have int min value is equal to integer dot max value. This will let us compare it to all of the elements that we have inside of our array. Alright, then we're going to start our for loop. So that's going to be for int I is equal to 0, and we're going to do I is less than the length of array, so num array dot length, and then I plus plus. Alright, after that we're going to do the total. So total equals to total plus num array. We're going to just add every single element to this total value. Alright, and then after this we're going to do our max value. That's going to be using an if statement. So if num array and the index that we want is bigger than the max value that we had stored inside of it before, then that's going to be our new max value. So our new max value is set to that index. Alright, The minimum is going to be very similar, so num array and that index that we want. If it's less than the minimum that we already have, then that's going to be our new minimum. All right, after we write this, we can also find our average outside of our for loop. That's going to be int average is equal to the total, and we're going to divide it by the length of our array. And after we've done that, we can just output everything that we have found. Okay, system.out.println, and we will write our message, which is the minimum is, and then we will give our minimum value. We're going to put a space here. All right, after we have outputted our minimum value, then we can also output our maximum value, which is, oh, I made a typo over here. Okay. And we have the maximum is, then we give our maximum value. We can also output our average and our total, so system.out.println. The average is going to be the average variable that we calculated. Oh. Same with the total. The total will be the total variable. All right, let's see if this works. Oh no, it doesn't, because we made some small syntax errors. Okay, now that those are fixed, we can run it again. The minimum is 0. Oh well, I can see why this is wrong. We never put anything inside of our array. Our array is all set to 0. The minimum is 0, maximum is 0, average is 0, total is 0. So how about we actually set some values? Okay, we're gonna have this 1, 6, 5, 2, 3. Let's see if it works. The minimum is 1, maximum is 6, average is 3, and total is 17. Perfect, it works. Now let's try that error that we're going to see. Let's see what that looks like. So if in our for loop we do less than or equal to, let's see what that happens. Okay, exception in thread main, and it's going to tell you where that error is and what index you're trying to go to, and that index doesn't exist. For a practice problem, prompt the user for 5 names and store them in an array. You can use a for loop to find the word that comes first alphabetically. If you want any challenge problems, you can use a website called Dmoj. We can put that in the description, and you can look at that for any problems to do as practice. Thank you for listening to this lesson. Subscribe to be updated on our weekly lessons.